In the stillness of a Hawaiian January morning in 2022, an individual shrouded in total, deliberate concealment, a light-colored, ill-fitting bucket hat pulled low, obscuring dark, oversized sunglasses, and the strategic layering of two thick scarves wrapped high around the neck and lower face, materialized from the Honolulu County surroundings and slipped silently into the independent Tokuhara Acupuncture and Healthcare Clinic in the quiet Wahiawa community. The entry was purposeful, captured with clinical precision on a nearby security camera. But it was the exit that became the most jarring detail of the entire tragedy. A mere 48 seconds later, the figure was gone, dissolving into the streetscape as quickly and mysteriously as they had arrived. Inside the small, unassuming office, 47-year-old John Tokuhara lay dead. The immediate crime scene was, paradoxically, both rich with evidence and utterly bewildering. Security cameras had documented the entire minute-long operation. Forensic teams quickly located spent shell casings on the office floor, and most significantly, the assailant left behind a critical personal item. The distinctive bucket hat. This seemingly open and shut homicide defied all expectations, rapidly spiraling into a complex, maddening investigative riddle, proving that the truth was far more labyrinthine and deceptively hidden than the surface suggested. Proving the identity of this cold-blooded killer would require an agonizing, systematic, and nearly impossible effort. Challenging the core assumptions of the case tonight, we immerse ourselves in one of the most compelling, lesser-known, and frustratingly complex cases to emerge from the usually tranquil islands of Hawaii. This is the harrowing narrative of a murder investigation and a subsequent prosecution that utterly shocked both the local community and law enforcement. It began with the apparent certainty of physical clues, casing, surveillance, a lost hat, all pointing toward a quick resolution. But as seasoned detectives began to methodically excavate the layers of John Tokuhara's life and the evidence left behind, new, profoundly disturbing details emerged. Established facts were ruthlessly challenged, and the once clear image of the murderer became terrifyingly obscure and fleeting. The community of Wahiawa, located in Honolulu County on the island of Oahu, is a historically significant area, once defined by expansive sugarcane plantations. Today, it is a quiet residential community of about 40,000, situated along the northern shores of Pearl Harbor's locks, just a short drive from the stunning vistas of Eva Beach. The morning of Thursday, January 13, 2022, dawned warm and exceptionally clear over Wahiawa. Around 8 a.m., Lily Tokuhara drove out of genuine concern to check on her son, John. John, a respected small business owner and practitioner, had operated his acupuncture clinic successfully for almost 20 years. He'd promised his mother he'd stop by the previous evening to pick up a homemade dinner she'd prepared, a commitment he failed to keep, prompting Lily's visit. Upon arriving at the clinic, Lily noticed her son's familiar white Tacoma pickup truck parked near the doorway. She entered through the unlocked back door. The front door, facing Wahiawa Depot Street, was secured with a heavy chain and had been visibly unused for at least 6 months. Inside the office, a mother's worst fear was realized. John was lying motionless on the floor, a devastating pool of blood surrounding his head. He was tragically unresponsive. Emergency services were called immediately, but the distraught mother found herself paralyzed, realizing with heartbreaking certainty that it was already too late. Officer John Minter of the Honolulu Police Department was the first on the scene. He initially located one spent .22 caliber shell casing on the office floor. The subsequent, more detailed forensic sweep by detectives yielded 2 additional crucial casings. One had settled tragically beneath John's body, and a third was discovered lodged in a difficult-to-spot location behind the office refrigerator. John's autopsy delivered a terrifying confirmation of the violence. His cause of death was a gunshot to the head, but the examination revealed he had been shot no less than 4 times. This was not a random act of violence, it was a brutally efficient, calculated execution. The sheer force, the close range, and the targeting, multiple headshots to the face, powerfully suggested a crime of intense, deeply personal passion or calculated, decisive vengeance. This theory was given significant weight by another critical forensic detail. Approximately $4,000 in large denomination bills was found conspicuously near John's body. If the killer's motive was standard robbery, they displayed a complete and confusing lack of interest in the substantial amount of cash readily available. The murder appeared to be intensely personal, yet carried out with terrifying, almost professional speed and callous detachment. John Tokahara, while unmarried, was the deeply beloved center of a devoted, tight-knit family, revered as a compassionate healer and a valued pillar of the community. Initial interviews with friends and family were fruitless. John was universally admired, yielding no clear suspects or obvious motive. Detectives were forced to focus their efforts on constructing a meticulous timeline from John's last hours. 2 cell phones belonging to John were found on his desk. One was an unserviced device used almost exclusively for playing the popular augmented reality game Pokemon Go via Wi-Fi. The application was opened at about 5:40 p.m. the previous night and remained active until the phone's battery depleted at 8:45 p.m. John's last communication was a text from his main phone to his mother just after 6 p.m. to coordinate picking up dinner. Crucially, there was no further digital activity whatsoever on that main device. After the precise moment of 6:18 p.m., this 6:18 p.m. timestamp became the single, immovable pillar for the investigation. With the lethal window established, investigators immediately focused on security camera footage from the surrounding business district. At approximately 3 minutes before 6 p.m., a white 4-door Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck with Hawaii license plates was captured turning north onto Wahiawa Depot Street from Farrington Highway. The truck executed a swift, calculated series of maneuvers in the immediate area before driving out of the camera's view. Minutes later, the highly obscured individual, the figure in the bucket hat and scarves, now carrying a brown shopping bag, emerged on foot and approached the clinic from the rear. This person entered John's office at about 6:16 p.m., correlating perfectly with the final activity on John's cell phone. The figure was then shown leaving only 48 seconds later. The white Silverado, though its front license plate was only partially readable in the grainy surveillance video, suggesting the format of 3 letters followed by 3 numerals, was instantly identified as the investigation's most valuable lead. The Honolulu Police Department's Strategic Enforcement Detail executed a systematic, painstaking process of elimination. They identified 53 registered Silverado pickup trucks in the state that matched the criteria: white 4-door, likely a 2014 to 2016 model, and a believed LLNNN license plate sequence. Through persistent, on-the-ground effort, requesting photographs, viewing the trucks in person across the island, and cross-referencing owner locations against the suspect's timeline, investigators claimed to have successfully ruled out 52 of the 53 vehicles. The process narrowed the focus to a single remaining Silverado, registered to a 34-year-old contractor named Eric Thompson. Eric had one known distant connection to the victim. He was an ex-client of John's, having sought treatment for carpal tunnel some years prior. Eric, a successful businessman, married father, and seemingly upstanding citizen, initially appeared to be an extremely unlikely suspect. The true devastating motive was finally unearthed from the voluminous digital data on John's main cell phone. Detectives were stunned to discover thousands of highly intimate messages, over 5,600 in a single month, with a woman named Joyce, who was none other than Eric Thompson's wife. The messages, which included exchanged nude photos, videos, and explicit texts, confirmed a deeply passionate and sexual relationship that had ended abruptly nearly 7 months before John's murder, when Eric discovered the affair. The exchanges revealed that John had been far more emotionally invested than Joyce, frequently expressing his love and pressuring her to leave Eric for a long-term commitment. Joyce, while a willing participant, had expressed reservations about leaving her husband and the detriment to her stable family life. The affair was brutally exposed in July when Eric confronted her, after their home security cameras captured her sneaking out of the house at 1 a.m. while he was away for work. Confessing the affair in full, Joyce agreed to end things with John, and the couple resolved to take steps to salvage their marriage. Ironically, their seemingly perfect marital life, which included a young daughter, had been linked to John. Joyce had initially gone to the clinic for fertility and back pain treatment following a miscarriage. With these shocking revelations, the Thompsons' lives were ripped open, and Joyce and Eric Thompson were immediately designated as persons of interest. The investigative focus then shifted entirely to Eric Thompson's precise movements on the evening of the murder. He was seen leaving his house in Kailua in his white 2014 Silverado at about 5:20 p.m., while cameras could not provide a continuous, unbroken chain of movement across the entire island. The travel time aligned almost perfectly. Google Maps indicated the drive would take between 35 and 55 minutes, and the Silverado was first seen on video in the Wahiawa area at 5:57 p.m., just 37 minutes after Eric left his driveway. Eric was then captured pulling back into his own driveway at 6:47 p.m. Less than an hour later, the same camera captured the distinct, incriminating light of a raging fire in the back of the Thompsons' property, which lasted about 5 minutes, an unmistakable and blatant attempt to destroy evidence. Eric then left the house a second time that night, and on this trip a crossbox, a large tool storage unit commonly used by contractors, was visibly strapped into the bed of the pickup truck, an item that had been conspicuously absent during his first return. A subsequent search of the Thompson home failed to produce the murder weapon, but the mounting circumstantial evidence was damning. A bucket inside a wheelbarrow in the backyard showed definitive burn marks. Police seized Eric's substantial collection of 12 registered firearms, along with 2 unregistered guns. Crucially, 2 of the registered weapons were .22 caliber rifles, a model type consistent with the murder weapon. However, ballistics testing confirmed that none of Eric's collected firearms were the match, leading detectives to conclude that the actual rifle was the item he disposed of during his second trip, the object placed in the crossbox. What they did find, however, were over 1,000 rounds of .22 caliber bullets. The final and perhaps most critical piece of physical evidence was the light-colored bucket hat worn by the assailant. As the shooter rapidly fled the clinic and quickly crossed Wahiawa Depot Street, the bucket hat was captured falling to the ground. It was a single, tiny, catastrophic slip that the killer failed to notice. The hat lay there for approximately 10 minutes before a pedestrian, eventually identified as a homeless man, spotted it and picked it up. He briefly wore the hat himself until he reached his campsite, where he hung it up in his tent, never wearing it again. The painstaking recovery and subsequent forensic processing of this single, abandoned piece of clothing would hold the ultimate, definitive key to either solidifying the case against Eric Thompson with biological evidence or potentially shattering the entire investigation's foundation. Forensic technicians meticulously processed the evidence recovered from the scene, focusing keenly on the discarded bucket hat. They found stray fibers and a hair, which were analyzed alongside 2 DNA samples swabbed from the inside of the hat's rim and its crown. The results were not exactly the smoking gun the prosecution desired, but they were certainly damning enough to justify the next step. Eric Thompson could not be excluded as the source of the DNA found inside the critical piece of evidence. On Valentine's Day 2022, a date heavy with bitter irony, Eric Thompson was formally arrested and charged with second-degree murder and carrying or using a firearm in the commission of a separate felony. He subsequently posted a substantial $1 million bond and began preparing for the confrontation in court. His defense team was firm, stating immediately, "Mr. Thompson will be entering a plea of not guilty, and we will be proceeding to trial in this case." The trial finally commenced in July 2023, and the state's arguments, led by the prosecution, concentrated intensely on the compelling motive, Joyce's prolonged affair with John Tokahara, and the brutally personal nature of the murder itself. The fact that the victim was shot 4 times in the head was framed as evidence of a personal, anger-fueled attack. They painted a stark picture of the perfect life and marriage that Eric Thompson believed he had once possessed, portraying the 34-year-old as a highly controlling perfectionist. Eric had dedicated himself to building a successful contracting business and saving enough for a down payment on a $2 million home. A life shattered when he discovered his wife Joyce's affair with John Tokahara. The prosecution emphasized how Eric had forced Joyce to confess the infidelity to her own parents and formally apologize for the affair, a public shaming that underscored his need for control and absolute order. The prosecution highlighted the over 5,600 intimate direct messages, DMs, exchanged between John and Joyce Thompson, one of his former clients. These messages were critical not just for their sexual and intimate content, including shared nude photographs and videos, but because they allegedly revealed that Eric had found out about his wife's affair not once, not twice, but an astonishing 4 separate times. They argued the murder was a definitive, deeply personal act. To finally reclaim that perfect life he coveted, Eric would have to end the life of the man who threatened it all. As long as John remained alive, Eric Thompson's life would remain imperfect. Thus, according to the state, Eric meticulously crafted a plan to finally resolve this existential threat. The prosecutor dramatically concluded that the defendant attempted to play how to get away with murder, but he failed. He failed because of the relentless pursuit of HPD watching weeks' worth of video surveillance. This narrative of cold, calculated revenge was central to the state's entire case against Thompson. However, when it came time for Eric's defense to present their arguments, the case, which had appeared so devastatingly clear-cut, was immediately thrown into complete disarray. Along with the certainty of the motive, the defense began dismantling the unfailingly positive public image of John Tokahara. It rapidly became evident that his affair with Joyce Thompson was not an isolated incident. It was not even the first time John had become involved with another man's wife or partner, or even close to it. The defense aggressively called up a line of witnesses prepared to testify to the acupuncturist's previous relationships, which had been the direct cause of at least one other divorce. It was revealed that his personal life was not the only source of controversy. Alongside intimate text messages on John's phone were strong indications that he was deeply involved in illegal gambling. Eric's defense team forcefully argued that the $4,000 in large bills found untouched at the murder scene and John's extensive betting activities were never properly investigated by the police. You will hear evidence that John Tokahara had a track record of cheating, of becoming involved with women who were already in relationships, the defense told the jury, citing one instance of 200 messages with another woman that police allegedly ignored. "We didn't follow up on that one. We didn't follow up on the woman he ghosted. We didn't follow up on the gambling posts." The detectives told witnesses specifically, John was not involved in gambling. Well, he had a secret life. Eric did not kill John Tokahara, and there will not be any evidence of it. I strike that. There will be massive reasonable doubt. The defense then called John DeMarco, who told the jury how his ex-wife began an affair with John that led to the painful dissolution of his marriage. DeMarco's wife had also initially been one of John's acupuncture patients. DeMarco testified that he had since moved on and remarried and held no ill will towards John. He noted that the acupuncturist became like a father figure to their daughter before eventually splitting with DeMarco's ex-wife, adding, "I was like good riddance, he could have her, and I wanted to just focus on my kid's life and myself." While the prosecution maintained that only Eric Thompson possessed a powerful, unique motive for murder, the defense countered by presenting witnesses who ostensibly held an identical, if not stronger, motive. Daryl Fouette, whose own relationship had also ended as a direct result of an affair with John, was called to testify. Police had explored Daryl as an initial person of interest, but eventually determined he had a tight alibi and no physical evidence linking him to the murder. Daryl did, however, admit to deleting data from his cell phone before talking to police, expressing his immense frustration at having been dragged into the investigation at all. I mean, I understand why, but I think it's ridiculous. It's not cool because literally I have nothing to do with this. Both John DeMarco and Daryl Fouette testified under oath that they had absolutely nothing to do with the murder, and that they harbored no reason to want John dead. Each placed the ultimate blame for their failed relationship squarely on their ex-partners, not John. After initial bouts of hurt and anger, they claimed they had moved on and placed the experience behind them. When Eric Thompson finally took the stand in his own defense, he testified that after discovering Joyce's affair, he reacted in exactly the same manner as the other cuckolded husbands. He worked on forgiveness and moving forward. Eric recounted how he and Joyce had approached John with their fertility issues, and John had been a genuine help to them both during that time. Eric was dumbfounded when he discovered the affair after viewing the security tape of his wife sneaking out late at night. He claimed he could find no innocent explanation. I was kind of scratching my head like, where are you going? And like, where's our daughter? I was pissed. I was really disappointed. John helped us through the pregnancy, and I just didn't understand why he would do that if he's just going to blow it up later. Eric stated that for the first couple of days, he considered calling John and chewing him out, but he came to the realization that he couldn't say anything to make things better. I don't think I could get him to say sorry or feel bad. I mean, what's the point? He obviously didn't care about what I thought or like or my family, so I just realized that there's just no point. Joyce agreed to stop seeing John immediately, and Eric worked on trying to forgive her. Over the following months, he claimed they were almost back to the same happy place they had been prior to the affair. I think she was truly sorry for it. She made the effort, She never talked to John again. I came to the realization that, the problem was with me and Joyce. It wasn't, she cut him off, and he was a non-factor after that. I realized I was kind of neglecting her sometimes. Crucially, Eric denied that the white Silverado captured driving around Wahiwa that night was his, and he flatly denied killing John Tokahara. During cross-examination, Eric's seeming acceptance of the betrayal was heavily scrutinized. The prosecutor pressed him, asking what details he knew of their intimacy. "So she did tell you that she said, 'I love you' to John Tokahara?" The prosecutor then hammered home the question of the explicit content. After discovering the affair, you never looked at her messages between her and John Tokahara? You never saw photos on the phone on Joyce's phone? Eric adamantly denied viewing the explicit photos or videos, sticking to his testimony that he restored trust and never looked at her phone after the affair ended. The defense pointed out that 11 days before the murder, Eric and Joyce entered into a postmarital agreement which stipulated that Eric would receive the house and sole custody of their daughter if they divorced. The prosecutor alleged Eric forced his wife to sign the agreement out of control. The defense countered that it was Joyce's idea, designed to prove to her husband that she would never be unfaithful again. However, problems re-emerged in the marriage. Eric insisted that Joyce stop seeing psychics after one had allegedly supported her choice to have the affair. Eric depicted Joyce's affinity for psychic readings as being similar to a substance addiction, like alcoholism. He stated that after the affair, she agreed to stop receiving readings, but in December of that year, a month before John's murder, Joyce again reached out to a psychic. The prosecution argued this was a breach in trust, showing the marriage had not healed, and was an example of Eric's continued control. He was done with psychics, and then I come to find out that she was seeking another one. So you still didn't trust your wife in December of 2021? Eric also had to account for the footage capturing his truck leaving the driveway at 5:20 p.m. and again, at just before 10 p.m., he testified that on the first trip, he was dumping construction materials, specifically a small load of bricks, at the Waimanalo Convenience Center. The second trip was to a shop to purchase a handful of food items paid for in cash. The prosecution noted that there was no video surveillance, receipts, transactions, or witnesses who could verify Eric's alibi. In fact, they called Rocky Javier, a security guard at the dump, who testified he'd never seen Eric Thompson and that the specific bricks Eric claimed to dump were prohibited items. Footage of Eric's Silverado leaving the drive at 5:20 p.m. also showed an empty truck bed, with no bricks visible. Concerning the flames emanating from his backyard, Eric claimed these were caused by tiki torches he often lights when he takes his daughter outside to play in the evenings. The defense called its own fire expert, who testified that the flames captured in the neighbor's camera could very well have been from tiki torches. Eric further explained that he used the wheelbarrow and bucket to melt metal for work projects. It was not only the video footage that was called into question. A defense DNA expert testified that the similarities in the testing from the bucket-style hat could in fact not be a definitive match to Eric Thompson at all. With the gaps in the footage of the Silverado and the weakness of the DNA testing, Eric's attorney was able to argue that the state had failed to place him conclusively at the crime scene. Furthermore, investigators needed to make multiple adjustments to the timestamps recorded on the various security cameras collected from businesses across Wahiwa to align them to real time. This highly complicated process was necessary to piece together the movements of the Silverado and link that vehicle to the unknown man in the hat. The defense pointed out that the initial arrest affidavit stated the man in the bucket hat entered the clinic at about 6:16 p.m. and remained for 48 seconds, yet the same affidavit stated John's phone was then unlocked at 6:18 p.m. 2 minutes later. The defense hammered this inconsistency. How can he be here by the door, there walking along by the stepping stones, okay, there in a truck, all in roughly the same time period? They needed to come up here and explain it all to you. They have not done so. The cell phone data also showed that John's game of Pokemon Go appeared to be active for hours after the state's theorized time of death. The prosecution posited that the application closed when the phone ran out of battery, but the defense argued that if it was instead manually turned off, then John must have still been alive after 8 p.m. Joyce Thompson, protected by spousal privilege, did not testify. While the defense spoke about what they called John Tokahara's secret life, prosecutors spoke about Eric's deceitfulness and lies. They argued he was dishonest about the true status of his relationship, and he was dishonest about his whereabouts on the night of the murder because the truth was that he still harbored intense ill will toward John Tokahara. The jury deliberated for 3 full days, after which they returned deadlocked. Judge Paul Wong declared a mistrial. 9 jurors had voted guilty, but 3 believed that he should be acquitted. The defense noted that many jurors felt the prosecution lacked concrete evidence and wanted something tangible. A second trial was initially scheduled for October 2023, though it never took place, and at the time of this narrative, there is no available date for a retrial. And that was today's journey into the crime depths. If you found this story as chilling as I did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with others who love uncovering the darkest corners of true crime. Every click, every share helps this community grow and brings more untold stories to light. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep digging into the crime depths. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Into the True Crime Depths channel. Chuluata, Florida is the kind of place people move to when they want to disappear into the quiet comfort of the American dream. With a population barely scraping past 2,000, it's a town of sprawling lawns and heavy silence. In 1986, Chad and Margaret Amato decided to make this tranquility their home. They were a pair defined by stability. Chad was a dedicated pharmacist with a self-taught, borderline obsessive mastery of computers. Margaret was a high-level healthcare manager who found her solace not in technology, but in the powerful, unpredictable grace of horses. Together, they raised 3 sons. Jason, the eldest from Margaret's previous marriage, whom Chad loved as his own, and their biological sons, Cody and Grant. By 2018, the family seemed to be approaching the finish line of a successful life. Chad and Margaret were planning their retirement to a peaceful plot of land in Tennessee. Jason was established in the mortgage industry. Cody and Grant had both followed the family path into medicine, graduating with honors and securing positions at an Orlando healthcare facility. The brothers shared a vision of opulence. They dreamed of high-end cars, and the day they would inherit the family's grand Chuluata estate. But beneath this veneer of academic success and professional ambition, a structural crack was forming in the family foundation. And that crack's name was Grant. While Cody excelled in his anesthesiology specialization, Grant hit a wall. He failed his entry examinations. Then, in June 2018, the floor dropped out. Grant was terminated from his hospital position. The allegations were grave. He was accused of misappropriating powerful pain medications and improperly administering drugs to patients. Grant claimed he was merely trying to provide better comfort for those who weren't relaxed enough, but the hospital saw it differently. He was arrested, and though formal charges weren't immediate, his career in medicine was effectively dead at the age of 29. Grant retreated to his parents' home, but he didn't return as the son they knew. He became a wraith. He lost a staggering amount of weight. His skin turned a sickly pallor, and dark, hollow circles framed his eyes. He became a nocturnal recluse, sleeping through the Florida sun and emerging only when the world went dark to immerse himself in the digital glow of his computer. On his live streams, he wore a mask. He told his viewers he lived in a mansion and drove a high-end BMW. In reality, he was a jobless man living in his childhood bedroom, driving a beat-up Honda Accord and spiraling into a void. It was in this void that he met Sylvie. She was a Bulgarian model on an adult webcam site. To the rest of the world, she was a performer. To Grant, she was the only person who understood him. He began spending $600 a night just to keep her camera active. He showered her with clothes and gifts, convinced they were in a committed relationship. But Sylvie's attention came at a price Grant couldn't afford. Over a mere 90 days, Grant squandered over $200,000. He didn't have the money, so he stole it. He siphoned funds from his father's retirement accounts and drained his brother Cody's savings. He even took out fraudulent loans. When the financial ruin was finally uncovered, Grant's family didn't cast him out. In an act of tragic loyalty, Chad covered the debts and paid for Grant's legal defense regarding the hospital theft. Cody even took Grant on an all-expenses-paid trip to Japan in December 2018, hoping a change of scenery would snap his brother back to reality. It didn't. Shortly after returning, the tension reached a breaking point. Chad was exhausted by Grant's refusal to find work and his continued obsession with the computer. On December 19th, after a volatile argument, Grant vanished. His mother, Margaret, terrified for her son's mental state, reported him missing. He was eventually found 40 miles away at his Aunt Donnie's house, where he had resumed his cycle of sleeping all day and stealing money at night, this time from his aunt's bank account to pay for more time with Sylvie. Chad intervened once more. He begged his sister not to call the police, promising to repay every cent. He confessed to her that Grant's addiction had ruined them financially. He would have to work until the day he died just to break even. On December 22nd, the entire family descended on Donnie's house for an intervention. They gave Grant a choice: the street or rehab. Grant entered a voluntary $15,000 treatment program for pornography addiction, funded entirely by Cody. While Grant was away, Chad took a final, desperate step to save his son. He contacted Sylvie directly. He explained the theft, the lies, and the ruin Grant had caused. Sylvie, seemingly horrified, promised to cut contact. Chad then wiped Grant's computer clean and changed every password, essentially deleting the virtual world Grant had built. On January 5, 2019, Chad took Grant to a local pizzeria for a final summit. He laid out a handwritten list of non-negotiable rules. No more late nights on the computer. No more contact with Sylvie. He had to find a job and begin paying back the hundreds of thousands he had stolen. If he failed, he was out of the house or headed for the military. Grant nodded. He agreed, but the digital withdrawal was already setting in. The end came on January 25, 2019. Cody Amato was a man of impeccable habits. When he failed to show up for his shift at the Orlando Medical Center, his colleagues didn't just wait, they panicked. He hadn't missed a day in 5 years. They learned that the night before, Chad had called Cody, sounding stressed, asking him to come home immediately. Sensing something was terribly wrong, the colleagues called for a welfare check. When deputies arrived at the Chuluata home, the silence was deafening. Cody's car was in the driveway. The officers knocked, rang the bell, and eventually blared their sirens. No movement, no answer. After receiving authorization to enter, they breached a side door. The interior of the house was a nightmare rendered in blood. In the transition area between the gym and the garage, they found Cody. He was curled in a fetal position, a single gunshot wound beneath his eye. A handgun lay 5 feet away, a clumsy attempt to stage a suicide that the forensics would later debunk. Moving into the kitchen, they found Chad. He was flat on his back, executed with 2 shots to the head. He was still wearing a holster on his hip, a sign that he had finally begun to fear his own son, but he never had the chance to draw. Finally, in the home office, they found Margaret. She was slumped over her desk, still in her chair. She had been shot once in the back of the head while she was working. There was no forced entry. No jewelry was missing. The only thing gone from the house was Grant Amato. The following day, detectives tracked Grant to a local hotel. During the interrogation, Grant was eerily calm. He admitted that on the night of the murders, his father had confronted him again. Chad had discovered that Grant was still using Twitter to communicate with Sylvie. Chad had told him to pack his bags and get out. Grant claimed he simply left and had no idea his family was dead. But the evidence told a different story. Investigators found that Grant had stayed in the house for hours after the killings, using his father's computer to try and reconnect with a woman who had become his entire universe. He had wiped out his family not for money, but to remove the gatekeepers who stood between him and a screen. Grant Amato was eventually found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains behind bars, a man who traded the lives of those who loved him most for a digital ghost. The hunt for Grant Amato reached its silent climax on January 26, 2019, in a nondescript hotel room in Orlando, Florida. When investigators breached the room, they didn't find a man in the middle of a frantic escape. They found a man who seemed entirely hollowed out by his own shadow. As they began to process the room, the evidence of his betrayal was immediate. Tucked away among his personal items were several credit cards that told a story of theft, desperation, and a total lack of empathy. They belonged to his brother Cody and his father Chad, the very men who were currently lying on cold metal slabs in a morgue. Grant didn't resist. He was led to the police station for an interrogation that would stretch for hours, a high-stakes psychological chess match where every word he spoke would eventually be used to dismantle his life. From the moment he sat down in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room, Grant began to weave a narrative designed to cast himself as the tragic victim of a broken home. He spoke with a strange, detached volunteerism, appearing almost eager to talk about anything except the blood on the floor of his family home. He went into exhaustive, rambling detail about his life as a professional gamer, a persona he had cultivated to hide his failures. But the conversation quickly turned dark as he began to air grievances against his family. He painted a portrait of his father, Chad, as a domineering, physically abusive tyrant who supposedly used violence to keep him in line. He spoke of deep-seated conflicts with his mother, Margaret, and his older brother, Jason. Yet, in a strange moment of clarity, he admitted that while he was supposedly the target of his father's rage, Cody had been spared. He confessed to the massive financial drain caused by his obsession with Sylvie, the Bulgarian webcam model. Yet throughout 3 hours of recorded testimony, a chilling pattern emerged that the detectives couldn't ignore. Not once in that entire time did Grant ask about the condition of his parents or his brother. He never asked if they were alive, how they had died, or if there were any leads on a suspect. He spoke of them in the past tense, as if he had already processed their deaths long before the police arrived. The atmosphere in the interrogation room shifted violently when the detectives stopped playing along with his stories and placed the crime scene photographs on the table. The sight of his family's bodies, the raw, undeniable reality of the massacre, finally cracked his facade. Grant began to sob, a performance of grief that the prosecution would later argue was more about his own capture than the loss of his family. Even through the tears, his story remained rigid. He maintained he had no idea who could have committed such a crime. In a final, desperate attempt to elicit a confession, the police brought in Jason, the only surviving brother. Jason's alibi was ironclad. He had been at work until 6 p.m. before spending the evening with a friend and her children. Facing the brother he had left alone in the world, Jason begged Grant to just tell the truth. He pleaded for an explanation, for a reason why their world had been destroyed. Grant met his brother's tears with a cold, stony silence that spoke louder than any confession ever could. Grant's account of the events on January 24th was a carefully constructed timeline of innocence that the police immediately began to pick apart. He claimed he was home all day, supposedly preparing for a job interview, until his father returned from work and discovered the ultimate betrayal. Despite the house rules and the rehab, Grant was still messaging Sylvie on Twitter using his mother's phone. Grant insisted Margaret had given him permission to use it, but the discovery led to a physical confrontation. He claimed Chad grabbed him by the shirt and ordered him to leave the house forever. According to Grant, they then spent 90 minutes talking in the driveway. A bizarrely calm conversation given the circumstances, which ended with Chad handing him a credit card to pay for a hotel. He told police he saw Cody arrive around midnight, said a brief and final goodbye to his family, and then drove to a local grocery store to use the free Wi-Fi to check directions for his interview before sleeping in his car. However, the testimony of those who knew the brothers painted a much more terrifying picture of the days leading up to the murders. Cody's girlfriend, Sloan Young, came forward with a revelation that added a layer of predatory intent to the case. She revealed that Grant hadn't just borrowed money. He had systematically stolen $60,000, specifically from Cody's hard-earned savings. More importantly, she stated that Cody had confessed to her that he was genuinely afraid of Grant. Cody, a man who dealt with life-and-death situations every day in the hospital, felt that his own brother was capable of something unspeakable. On January 28, 2019, the state of Florida officially charged Grant Amato with 3 counts of first-degree intentional murder. Even as he sat in a cell, he refused to admit guilt, and because he had cross-hooked the family's finances to the bone, he was unable to secure the $750,000 bond required for his release. When the trial finally commenced in July 2019, the prosecution moved with surgical precision, using digital forensics to dismantle Grant's alibi second by second. Hello reconstructed a grim, hour-by-hour timeline of the massacre that proved Grant had been lying from the start. He had been home alone with his mother all afternoon. Margaret's computer showed its final activity at 4:44 p.m. The prosecution surmised that Grant walked into her office and shot her in the back of the head at 4:45 p.m. while she was still at her desk, working to support the son who was about to kill her. Then he waited for his father. Chad's health app recorded 67 steps at 5:25 p.m. as he walked from his car into the kitchen. For the next 27 minutes his phone was silent. The evidence suggested Grant shot him almost immediately, but the first wound wasn't fatal. A horrific blood trail showed Chad desperately trying to crawl toward a phone to call for help, only for Grant to stand over him and deliver the final execution-style shot at 5:52 p.m. For the next 4 hours, Grant sat in a house filled with the bodies of his parents, waiting in the dark for his brother to come home from work. Cody didn't leave the hospital until 9:45 p.m., the moment he walked through the door. Thinking he was coming home to a normal family evening, he was killed instantly. But it was what Grant did after the killings that truly shocked the jury. At 11:32 p.m., while his family lay cooling on the floor, Grant plugged a flash drive into his computer. He spent the next several hours viewing 600 photos and videos of Sylvie, the woman who had become his entire reality. At 12:08 a.m., he took his dead father's hand and used his fingerprint to bypass the biometric lock on a banking app. Desperate to find more money to fuel his obsession, he tried to do the same with Cody's phone but failed because he didn't know the password. by 3:06 a.m. He was at a grocery store, using their Wi-Fi to pay $600 to regain access to the webcam site to tell his girlfriend that he was finally free. During the trial, Grant's defense tried to pivot, suggesting that Cody had been the one to snap, murdering their parents before taking his own life. They pointed to the handgun found near Cody's body as proof. However, the prosecution tore this theory apart by pointing to the staging of the scene. They noted the holster on Chad's thigh was a cross-draw holster placed on the wrong side of his body, a mistake Chad, an experienced and meticulous man, would never make. It was a clumsy attempt by Grant to make it look like a struggle had occurred. Furthermore, the forensics showed the bodies had been moved post-mortem. Chad was found face up despite a head wound that should have left him face down. Most significantly, the guns found at the scene weren't even the murder weapons. Ballistics suggested the killer used a 9mm handgun that had been reported missing by a friend of Grant's shortly before the killings, a weapon Grant had access to. The true motive was ultimately found in a letter Grant wrote to his online friends shortly before the massacre. In it, the mask of the professional gamer was completely stripped away. He confessed that his entire life was a lie and expressed a toxic, burning hatred for his father for ruining his fantasy by telling Sylvie the truth about his life. He wrote that his heart was breaking and that his life was meaningless without her. Despite the defense's claim that no direct DNA evidence linked him to the trigger, the jury saw the cold, calculated nature of the digital trail he left behind. On July 31, 2019, Grant Amato was found guilty on all counts. On August 12th, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. A man who had traded the lives of the three people who loved him most for the fleeting attention of a woman who never truly knew him. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Don't forget to like and share your opinion in the comments. See you in the next video.
From the outside, they had it all. Lucy, Caitlin, and Jane Lee, three identical faces destined for a life of privilege and power. They were the perfect triplets, the daughters of a self-made millionaire, groomed for a dynasty they were expected to inherit. But for one of them, the path to a perfect life became a one-way street to absolute ruin. This is the story of Lucy Lee, a story of ambition, rebellion, and a shocking descent into darkness. Born in 1995 in Shenzhen, China, the triplets' early years were spent in the care of relatives. Their parents had immigrated to Toronto, Canada, to build a new life, a grand future they would one day share with their children. When the girls were 7, they were finally brought to Canada to join their parents and 2 new younger siblings. The family was a testament to the immigrant dream. Their father ran a successful driving school for Chinese immigrants, but the true architect of their success was their mother, Hong Wei, known to her loved ones as Winnie. Winnie was a force of nature. She built an asset management business called Reesbound International, specializing in helping Chinese Canadians manage their wealth. She sold life insurance policies that allowed clients to legally transfer large sums of money from abroad without paying taxes. Her business thrived, and she became a well-known, respected figure in Canadian business circles. She spoke at conferences, mingled with the country's most powerful figures, and was even photographed with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. She wasn't just wealthy, she was a multi-millionaire, a true pillar of the elite. But with great success came great expectations for her children. The triplets rarely saw their mother as she was consumed by her work. When she was home, she was a strict disciplinarian, demanding nothing short of excellence. Winnie wasn't a cruel woman. She simply wanted her children to follow in her footsteps and achieve greatness. She trained them to be the best, insisting they spend their free time doing chores and studying instead of playing or socializing. By the age of 13, the triplets had already founded their own non-profit, the Canadian Youth Funding Association, a project their mother encouraged to push them towards success. They were brought to business events, prepared to one day take their place in Winnie's company. However, not all the children shared their mother's singular vision. For Lucy, the pressure was suffocating. She wasn't the most diligent student, and her academic performance was a constant source of disappointment for her mother, leading to frequent and bitter arguments. At school, Lucy felt she didn't fit in. With her bangs and braces, she saw herself as a nerd, an outsider in her own life, and an outcast even within a family that valued academic achievement above all else. At 14, Lucy met a boy who offered a thrilling escape from the pressure cooker of her life. His name was Oliver Carafa. He was 16, a Slovak immigrant who had moved to Canada with his family at age 8. Oliver wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a troublemaker either. He was just a typical high school boy. Their relationship was brief, ending abruptly when Oliver, looking for more than Lucy was ready to give, cheated on her with one of her friends. The years passed. The triplets graduated from high school, and at their mother's insistence, all three enrolled in the business faculty at the University of Toronto. Winnie had their entire futures mapped out. It seemed their own wishes didn't matter. She was simply grooming her replacements. She even turned their lives into a competition, promising a new car to the sister who achieved the highest grades. This created a tension between the sisters that was both visible and destructive. After university, Lucy began working for her mother in the life insurance business. But the stress of trying to meet Winnie's impossible standards pushed her to the brink. She felt trapped in a life she didn't want, living out a plan that wasn't her own. Lucy made a radical decision. She asked for a 2-year sabbatical to travel and figure out what she really wanted. The family's wealth allowed for this, and Winnie, surprisingly, gave in. The triplets were each given a monthly allowance of several $1,000s. With newfound freedom, the sisters found a new purpose. They became influencers. They created accounts under the username Mia Triplets and began posting content, mainly modeling. Many of their photos featured them in lingerie or swimsuits, often with the hashtag #SexyTriplets. Their accounts gained a following, 60,000 on one platform, 40,000 on another. They weren't global stars, but they had a large, dedicated audience. Companies began to reach out, sending them free products and paying them between $500 and $1,000 per post. One sister, Caitlin, even began competing in beauty pageants, winning titles like Miss Intercontinental Canada, which further boosted their online popularity. Then, in 2019, Oliver Carafa reappeared on the horizon. He was now 26. What had he been doing for the last decade? After their high school romance, Oliver had tried his hand at modelling, but most of his time had been spent behind bars. In 2012, at age 19, he had gotten into a car with his friend David after a night of heavy drinking. Oliver, with a blood alcohol level several times the legal limit, got behind the wheel. He lost control, crashed into a pole, and in a horrific accident, his friend was killed instantly when his seatbelt failed. Oliver miraculously survived with only minor injuries. He was arrested and charged with driving under the influence causing death. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The parole board described him as a young man with an abnormal sense of entitlement who believed society's rules didn't apply to him. He served the full 5 years. After his release, Oliver stumbled upon the triplets' social media accounts and recognized Lucy. She was now a confident, attractive model, and he was determined to reconnect. Lucy was thrilled. She had a romanticized memory of their relationship, and she found him even more charming and handsome than she remembered. She agreed to go on a date, and their relationship developed at a dizzying pace. By their second date, Lucy had moved in with him. Lucy's mother was furious. She cut off Lucy's financial support, declaring that since her daughter was living with her boyfriend, he could support her. This was a significant blow to Lucy, who was used to a life of luxury. However, the problem was quickly solved when Oliver began earning substantial sums of money, though it was through less than legal means. He started one shady venture after another, from exporting cars for social media ad shoots to selling weighted blankets. He was a hustler, driven by a desire to become an influential multimillionaire businessman. He was a thief, smuggling cars and selling them for parts. But as the saying goes, if you're not caught, you're not a thief. Lucy became his willing accomplice. Since his driver's license was revoked, she acted as his personal driver, chauffeuring him to all his meetings and helping him transport cars. They were a team, deeply entangled in Oliver's illicit enterprises. Their relationship was one of impulsive recklessness. In the spring of 2020, during the height of the pandemic, Oliver decided they should travel to Europe. They booked a flight to Slovakia, but at the airport, they were told that Lucy couldn't board the flight due to pandemic restrictions unless she was Oliver's wife. Most people would have cancelled the trip, but Lucy and Oliver were not reasonable. They got married right there in the airport online via Zoom. It was a testament to how deeply she had fallen under his spell. After several months of travel, they returned to Canada, and Oliver set his sights on a new venture. He met a man named Tyler Pratt. Tyler, a British Columbia native, was a family man and a successful entrepreneur on paper, running a diamond production company and a dietary supplement company. But his real business was selling illegal substances. He was a major player, a man who could sell $1 million worth of drugs in a single day. Tyler, however, wanted to quit the game. He was engaged to a woman named Jordan, and he wanted to start a new, honest life. In July 2020, fate brought Tyler and Oliver together. Oliver, hearing of Tyler's wealth, arranged a business dinner. He was incredibly charming, telling Tyler about his grand, legitimate plans. At the end of the dinner, Oliver asked Tyler to invest in one of his new ventures. Tyler, impressed by the young man's ambition and taken with the idea of a legitimate business, agreed to invest $170,000 on the spot without even knowing what the business was. When Oliver returned home, he asked Lucy to help him come up with a business to invest the money in. Oliver's initial idea was to use the money to bring girls from Eastern Europe and find clients for them in Canada. He wanted to invest Tyler's money in a human trafficking operation. Fortunately, Lucy had a moment of clarity and dissuaded him, telling him it was the dumbest idea he'd ever had. They finally decided to invest in selling personal protective equipment, a highly profitable venture during the pandemic. But Oliver's true nature, his willingness to resort to the most despicable crimes, had been revealed. He was a man without a moral compass, and Lucy was now in too deep to escape. The stage was set for a confrontation that would end in a brutal and horrifying crime. The initial story Oliver spun was a brilliant lie. He went to Tyler and, with his usual charm, outlined the advantages of a new venture, convincing him they had struck gold. Tyler was thrilled, seeing Oliver not just as a business partner, but a new best friend. Their fiancée, Jordan and Lucy, also became fast friends. The couples began meeting frequently, sharing meals, and even planning a joint vacation to Italy. Oliver's manipulation was masterful. He told Tyler that the personal protective equipment business was booming, that profits were pouring in by the truckload. But to increase shipments, he needed more money. Pratt, inspired by the idea of being a legitimate investor, didn't hesitate. He gave Oliver another $470,000, bringing his total investment to $640,000. All of it was transferred verbally, with no official contracts, just handshakes over dinner. Tyler was 99% confident in his new partner. What he didn't know was that all of it was a lie. The business was likely non-existent, and the money had disappeared. Even Lucy at the time seemed unaware of the full extent of her husband's deceit. She genuinely believed Oliver was investing the money in protective equipment to be shipped to Europe. But a few months later, Tyler started asking questions. Where was his share? When would he see a return on his investment? Oliver showed Tyler fake bank statements with a balance of $12 million, assuring him that $3 million was guaranteed for him. But this was nothing more than a desperate attempt to buy time. The truth was, Oliver had lost all of Tyler's money. He confessed this to Lucy, admitting he had no idea how to get out of the situation. Lucy, in an act of staggering recklessness, came up with her own scam. She wrote a check for $1.5 million from her mother's bank account, a check she assured Oliver her mother would never notice was missing. It was a temporary fix, a lie meant to placate Tyler. The check was never cashed. But the lies didn't stop there. Lucy, using her knowledge of her mother's insurance business, sold Tyler and Jordan a fake $1.5 million insurance policy. She told them it would allow them to transfer money from Europe to Canada without paying taxes. But in reality, it was just another scam. Lucy committed insurance fraud, pocketing the money she received from her friends. By February 2021, Tyler had had enough. He was done with the stalling and the lies. He had bought the insurance policy to speed up the transfer of his funds, but he still hadn't seen a cent. He delivered a chilling ultimatum to Oliver. If he didn't see the money by March 1st, there would be serious problems. Oliver panicked. He knew about Tyler's past and feared his connections. With nowhere left to turn, Oliver and Lucy made a monstrous decision. They decided to end it all. On February 28, 2021, one day before the deadline, Oliver invited Tyler and Jordan to a business meeting. The new venture? A marijuana growing operation. Oliver claimed he had found the perfect warehouse and a realtor to meet them there. The entire story was a lie. Earlier that day, Oliver had bought a car from a friend for cash, a white Audi Q5, and Lucy had purchased a prepaid SIM card to avoid being traced. Oliver and Lucy had exchanged messages detailing a sinister plan to be carried out that day. They drove to the warehouse, parking the Audi in a hidden dead end. Lucy, who was driving, even wore a blonde wig as a disguise. Shortly after, Tyler and Jordan arrived in their Range Rover. Tyler got out of the car, confused by the strange vehicle and Lucy's bizarre disguise. He asked about the realtor. Meanwhile, Lucy got into the Range Rover with Jordan to distract her. Jordan was dressed for a business meeting, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lucy was wearing old sweatpants and the cheap wig. The whole situation was off. Jordan had another reason to be nervous. She was 13 weeks pregnant. This was not a secret, which made what happened next even more horrific. As Lucy was talking, she suddenly opened the car door and jumped out. At that moment, Jordan looked up and saw Oliver pointing a gun directly at Tyler's face. While Lucy had been distracting her, Oliver had pulled out his weapon. Before Jordan could react, Oliver aimed the gun at her and fired. The first 2 bullets hit the car, but Jordan instinctively shifted into gear and tried to drive away. Oliver fired a 3rd time, and this time the shot hit its mark, striking her in the chest. Tyler, standing a few feet away, was frozen in shock. When he realized his pregnant fiancée had just been shot, he lunged at Oliver. But Oliver turned and fired 5 or 6 times, hitting Tyler in the arms and head. The final bullet hit him in the chest, and Tyler collapsed, dead. Jordan and Tyler, who saw Oliver and Lucy as friends, trusted them implicitly. It was all a lie. After the senseless attack, Oliver and Lucy pulled Jordan's body out of the Range Rover and left her on the roadside. They took the SUV, planning to sell it for parts. They then returned to the industrial park in the Audi, walked past the bodies of Jordan and Tyler, and drove to a garage to have both cars dismantled. They returned home by taxi, a sickening sense of triumph in the air. They had committed the perfect crime, or so they thought. At 7:30 p.m., a truck driver passing the industrial park noticed a woman lying motionless on the ground. To his astonishment, Jordan Romano, despite being shot, was still alive. With her last bit of strength, she whispered that she had been shot and begged him to call an ambulance. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where she was taken into surgery. Police officers were also dispatched and found Tyler's body behind the warehouse. He had died instantly. Oliver and Lucy were at home watching the news, reveling in their success. But their victory turned to panic when the reporter announced that one of the victims had survived and was in stable condition. This meant their perfect plan had failed. They decided to flee Canada immediately. They flew to Eastern Europe, spending a few days in Prague before going to Slovakia to stay with Oliver's parents. The police investigation began with a tip from a borrowed SIM card. The number used at the crime scene was traced back to Lucy's friend, who honestly told the officers she had lent her card to Lucy Lee. The police now had their first suspects. Surveillance cameras at the airport captured Oliver and Lucy hurriedly leaving their apartment and heading for the airport, adding to the suspicion. Evidence began to mount against them. The blonde wig, blood-stained clothes, documents related to the insurance fraud, and the keys to the Audi seen at the crime scene. 3 days after the shooting, Jordan Romano woke up from her coma. Police had to deliver the heartbreaking news. She had lost not only her fiancé, but also their unborn child. Jordan, with incredible strength, recalled the events of that tragic day. An international arrest warrant was issued for Oliver Carafa and Lucy Lee. Oliver's parents, upon learning of the charges, paid €250,000 to people who hid the couple and provided them with new identification. They disappeared in Budapest, Hungary, where they hid for 2 months. When they were finally arrested and placed in a Hungarian jail, Lucy, used to a life of luxury, complained about the hard bed and tasteless food. She declared that she needed to return to Canada immediately, demanding a first-class seat on the flight home, claiming her mother could afford it. Back in Canada, Lucy was questioned by police but refused to speak, citing her lawyer's advice. Her mother, Winnie, paid the $2.7 million bail, and Lucy was released pending trial. However, she later violated her bail conditions and was sent back to jail. Oliver, extradited back to Canada, was denied bail and spent 2 years in prison. The trial began in April 2024. In the courtroom, Lucy crafted an elaborate tale of a woman who was a victim of her husband's manipulations. She accused Oliver of every crime imaginable, all in an attempt to absolve herself. Oliver refused to testify. The jury, however, saw through their lies. They found both Oliver and Lucy guilty on all charges. Both were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The story of Lucy Lee is a cautionary tale of a girl who had everything but chose to throw it all away. Her journey from the golden cage of her privileged life to a prison cell is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones hiding in plain sight. If this case gripped you, subscribe to Into the Crime Depths, like, and share to explore more chilling true crime stories. See you in the next investigation.
Imagine a life bathed in the warm Miami sun, a picture of success and happiness. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene lay a darkness, a secret, waiting to erupt. This is the chilling story of the Sutton family, where a troubled past didn't just knock, it kicked down the door with deadly force. What truly happened on that fateful night in Coral Gables? John and Susan Sutton built a life many envied. He, a renowned attorney, she, a dedicated head nurse. Their luxurious Coral Gables home was a symbol of their success. They adopted Christopher, then welcomed Melissa 7 years later, creating a seemingly perfect family unit. They instilled values, discipline, and a love for community. They traveled, they scuba dived, they enjoyed life's finest. John's legal career soared. Susan was his rock at home and in the office. Their world appeared flawless, a testament to hard work and dedication. But even in paradise, shadows can lurk, unseen and waiting. While Melissa was calm and obedient, Christopher was different. He was the family's black sheep, a role he seemed to embrace. His parents hoped he had left his troubled youth behind. They believed he had changed, that the defiance and anger were gone. But appearances can be deceiving. Unknown to John and Susan, darker intentions festered beneath Christopher's newfound calm. A history of defiance, anger, and a chilling disregard for rules hinted at a deeper problem. This troubled past wasn't buried. It was merely lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to strike. August 22nd, 2004. A night of celebration. Susan had just turned 57, and John's firm secured major legal victories. A small gathering at their home on Orduna Drive. Christopher, his fiancée Juliet, and John's law partner Teddy Minotto stopped by. Laughter filled the air. Toasts were made. As the evening wound down, Christopher and Juliet left for a movie. Teddy headed home, tired. John and Susan retired to their separate bedrooms, a practical arrangement due to John's snoring. They said goodnight, unaware that this seemingly ordinary night would be their last together, a prelude to unimaginable horror. Around 10:30 p.m., the unthinkable happened. A figure dressed in black slipped into the Sutton home. They knew the layout, the habits. The back sliding door, often left unlocked, offered easy entry. The family dog barely stirred. This wasn't a random act. It was calculated, precise. Armed with a 9mm Glock, the intruder moved silently through the house. Their mission was clear: death. They bypassed valuables, ignoring the signs of wealth. This was personal, targeted. The air grew heavy with a sense of impending doom as the figure approached the bedrooms. The first shots shattered the night's silence. 6 rounds fired into Susan's bedroom. She was on the phone, her life brutally extinguished in an instant. Before John could fully comprehend the horror, the assailant was in his room. Shots rang out again, hitting him in the torso and face. Bleeding profusely, critically wounded, John somehow managed to reach the phone. His groans of pain filled the 911 call. "I need police. Somebody came in and shot me," he gasped. He couldn't see his attacker, only the devastating consequences. The gunman vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of carnage. Police swarmed the quiet neighborhood. Medics rushed John to the hospital, clinging to life. Susan was pronounced dead at the scene. As investigators processed the crime, they noted the untouched valuables. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something far more sinister. Teddy Minotto, John's law partner, arrived, claiming he was on the phone with Susan when he heard the shots. Why was he calling so late? Could he be involved? Teddy became the first suspect. His background as a competitive shooter raised immediate red flags. Detective Cordo pressed Teddy. His gun was tested. He failed a polygraph. The pressure mounted until he confessed to an affair with Susan. A motive? Perhaps. But his gun didn't match the murder weapon, and his alibi for the time of the shooting held up. Teddy was cleared, but the affair added another layer of complexity to the Suttons' seemingly perfect life. Investigators looked elsewhere. John's high-profile career meant enemies. Death threats weren't uncommon. They scrutinized every lead, every disgruntled client. An angry woman who had threatened John's office days before the attack seemed promising. Could she have used a boat to escape via the waterway? Police investigated the woman, her boat, her alibi. Surveillance footage showed her boat never left the dock. Another dead end. The list of potential suspects dwindled. Who would want John and Susan Sutton dead so desperately, yet leave their valuables untouched? The motive remained elusive. The killer a ghost. The case stalled. Investigators were back at square one, poring over every detail, every interview. They revisited the family, the guests, the history, and then they started looking closer at the one person who seemed most devastated by the tragedy: Christopher Sutton. On the surface, Christopher was the grieving son, but as detectives dug deeper, his past began to surface, layer by layer. His teenage years were marked by defiance, anger, and a diagnosis of conduct disorder. He struggled in school, constantly pushing boundaries, causing trouble. His parents tried everything, but he resisted their efforts. He snuck out of boarding schools, skipped classes, and engaged in vandalism. His behavior escalated. He wanted tattoos, piercings, drugs, things his parents disapproved of. When he didn't get his way, he'd explode in destructive rages. A chilling detail emerged. At 16, he'd pointed a rifle at Susan and Melissa, threatening them. Though the gun was unloaded, the act revealed a disturbing capacity for malice. Christopher's resentment towards his parents grew. He felt controlled, misunderstood. One day, Susan found a note in his room expressing a desire to kill them for his inheritance. He dismissed it as a joke, but Susan was terrified. They considered a restraining order, but ultimately decided on a more drastic measure, sending him away. They sent the 17-year-old to Paradise Cove, a behavior modification program in Samoa. It was a harsh environment, known for severe discipline and isolation. Christopher felt abandoned, punished. He sent tearful video messages, pleading to come home, expressing his pain and anger. His parents visited but remained firm, believing it was for his own good. Christopher's time at Paradise Cove, extended by a court order his father secured, solidified his hatred. He felt betrayed, imprisoned. The experience didn't reform him. It hardened him, fueling a deep-seated desire for revenge. His relationship with his parents was irrevocably damaged. Could this resentment, this history of defiance and anger, be connected to the brutal attack? As investigators pieced together Christopher's past, a chilling possibility began to emerge. Was the grieving son merely playing a part? Was this horrific crime the culmination of years of simmering rage and a twisted desire for inheritance? Christopher's interrogation seemed straightforward. He had an alibi. He was at the movies with Juliet. He provided tickets, and surveillance footage confirmed they left the house. But Detective Cordo noticed something odd in the footage. Christopher was constantly on his phone as he left. Phone records revealed a staggering number of calls in the weeks leading up to the murder. 331 calls to a single number. That number belonged to Garrett Kopp, Christopher's childhood friend and smoking partner. Why were they in such constant contact? The focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. Months after the shooting, Garrett Kopp was arrested for an unrelated assault with a gun in Miami. A detective remembered the Sutton case and requested Garrett's weapon. The ballistics report sent a jolt through the investigation. Garrett's gun matched the one used to kill Susan Sutton and wound John. Brought in for questioning, Garrett initially said little, but under pressure, the truth spilled out. It was a chilling confession. Christopher had hired him to kill his parents for $100,000 of the inheritance money. Christopher planned everything, providing the gun, directing Garrett to the unlocked back door, describing the bedrooms. He even threatened Garrett and his son if he ever spoke about it. The perfect life, the successful parents, the troubled son, it all culminated in a cold-blooded plot, orchestrated by their own child. Christopher Sutton, the black sheep, had not changed. His troubled past wasn't behind him. It was the blueprint for his horrific crime. He used his friend, driven by greed and years of festering resentment. Garrett Kopp was arrested for murder and attempted murder. The man who pulled the trigger was caught, but the mastermind, the son who betrayed his family in the most devastating way imaginable, was the true architect of the Suttons' tragedy. The shadow in the sunshine had finally consumed them. The Sutton family murder is a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving. It highlights the devastating consequences of unresolved trauma, resentment, and the lengths some will go for greed. It forces us to confront the darkness that can exist even within seemingly perfect families. But all eyes remained on Christopher. Determined to uncover the truth, investigators turned to someone who knew him best, his girlfriend, Juliet. She was brought in for questioning. Calm and composed, she seemed to have nothing to hide. Juliet claimed she knew nothing about the crime. Though she was in a relationship with him, she had no knowledge of any plan. Over the course of 13 relentless hours, she maintained her innocence. She loved John and Susan like her own parents. John had given her a job at his law firm, and Susan had taught her practical skills like makeup and home management. She had become part of the family. Juliet even broke into tears, hoping to convince the officers, but they remained unmoved. They threatened her with arrest if she didn't tell the truth. That's when Juliet realized she had to save herself. She revealed the truth. Christopher had long harbored deep hatred toward his parents for sending him to Samoa. He believed they had ruined his life. He wanted revenge, no matter how long it would take. Detectives already knew about his time in Samoa. They just needed confirmation. Meanwhile, John was waking up in the ICU. The injury had left him blind. His daughter Melissa said he was unrecognizable. It was a miracle he survived. After being discharged, John moved in with Christopher. Within days, his son tried to take control of his bank account. Then came the call. Early that morning, detectives warned John, "Don't let anyone into the house until we get there." Everything started to make sense. Christopher wanted payback. When the officers arrived, they broke the news. Despite his condition, John assisted them with crucial information to solve Susan's murder. News of Christopher's warrant went public, and he fled. He remained on the run for nearly 2 weeks before being captured, tried, and convicted. As the trial unfolded, the disturbing truth about Christopher Sutton was revealed. The prosecution paraded witness after witness, each one painting a clearer picture of the rage and resentment that consumed him, an obsession that led to revenge. The much-anticipated trial began on July 7, 2010. John Sutton, devastated, sat far away from his son. Prosecutor Kathleen Hogue told the jury how Christopher had hired a hitman to kill his parents so he could cash in on a life insurance policy. Christopher, back from Samoa with no real job, dealt drugs and depended entirely on his parents. Then came the testimony of Garrett Kopp, Christopher's childhood friend. "Mr. Kopp, did you shoot Susan Sutton with the intent to kill her?" "Yes." "Did you succeed?" "Yes." "What kind of weapon did you use?" "A handgun." "Did you shoot John Sutton with the intent to kill him as well?" "Yes, but I didn't succeed." Garrett detailed how he entered the house, shot both parents, and walked out unnoticed. He said he and Christopher had planned the attack for months. Christopher even gave him $50 to buy black clothes for the hit at Walmart. He openly admitted, "Christopher hired me to do the job." But the defense pushed back. Attorney Bruce Fleer argued that Garrett had only testified to avoid the electric chair, cutting a 30-year plea deal. Christopher testified that Garrett was addicted to drugs and had broken into the house to steal marijuana. He claimed Garrett knew exactly where the stash was hidden, in the closet of his old bedroom, the same room Susan now used. According to him, Garrett panicked when he found Susan awake, shot her, then shot John out of fear. But prosecutors had a bombshell, a text message Christopher had sent Juliet. "We're going to be better off once they're gone." In court, Christopher lowered his head and cried. He insisted he was being set up. He believed Juliet would never say such things about him. He was wrong. Juliet took the stand next. She told the jury how her boyfriend often referred to his mother with vile names at the slightest disagreement. He resented her for not giving him the life he believed he deserved. Samoa had scarred him. He was angry, and the trauma never left. She confirmed that he believed his parents had stolen years from his life, and they needed to pay. The defense countered again, claiming Juliet, too, was threatened into testifying. But she ended by saying she never truly believed he would go through with it. She thought it was all just talk. But John was no longer in doubt. He took the stand to seal his son's fate. He described Christopher's unquenchable thirst for money. For someone without a job, he always needed more, to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. After being discharged, John noticed Christopher trying to control his finances. Suspicious, John began hiding information, unknowingly saving himself from his own son. Though convinced of his son's guilt, John admitted in court, "I can no longer love him. I'm no longer his father. I'm Melissa's father now." Despite the mountain of evidence, Christopher still tried to prove his innocence. He claimed Juliet was lying, that Garrett was desperate to avoid death row. He said everything was a setup. After a day and a half of deliberations, Christopher Patrick Sutton was found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Garrett pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received 30 years. His father, Mitchell Kopp, was heartbroken. He'll spend half his life behind bars over a stupid decision. After sentencing, John returned to his law practice. Though blind, he worked on regaining his vision through an experimental device implanted in his eye. He memorized legal briefs and won cases, just like before. He even found love again. But he has never forgiven Christopher. Now in his 70s, John continues practicing law, rebuilding his life piece by piece. What could have been done to save Christopher from himself? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you appreciate the way we tell these stories, please like and subscribe to the Into the Crime Depths channel for more true crime insights. Thanks for watching.
In the spring of 2019, East Detroit was alive with the usual rhythms of the city. The corner gas station stayed open late, music pulsed from cars that cruised through neighborhoods, and small groups of young people found places to gather on weekends. Among them was a tight-knit group of friends in their late teens and early 20s. For them, it was a chance to escape the struggles of everyday life, to laugh, to party, and to live openly and freely in ways that weren't always possible in their daily lives. On the night of May 25, 2019, that escape turned into a nightmare. A night of joy and noise dissolved into chaos and bloodshed when a man in a mask stepped through the door of their party house and opened fire. Within seconds, 3 young lives were cut short, and the survivors were left not only injured, but scarred by what they witnessed. The killing shocked Detroit, and the investigation that followed revealed a chilling motive rooted in secrecy, shame, and hatred. That Friday evening had begun like so many others. The group gathered at a modest house on Devonshire Road, a place under construction but open enough to host the night's events. The crowd started larger, with drinks being poured, music echoing through the rooms, and laughter spilling into the street. Over the hours, some people came and went. There were hookups, arguments, and jokes shouted across the house. By the time the night settled into the early morning hours, only 5 people remained inside. Blair Keys, Paris Cameron, Alante Davis, Armin Matthews, and Timothy Blanchard. They were tired, buzzing from alcohol and adrenaline, winding down among the clutter of bottles and construction dust. The mood had shifted to something calm, intimate, and relaxed. But then came the sound sharp cracks at the front door. At first, some thought it was fireworks. After all, it wasn't unusual in Detroit for late-night celebrations to spill into the streets. But the sound was too close, too sharp, and too menacing. The door burst open. A figure in a ski mask stormed in, his eyes the only visible feature. In his hand was a gun, already raised. Without hesitation, he began firing into the group. The living room erupted into chaos. Blair sprinted to the bathroom, slamming the door and diving behind it as bullets ripped through the air. He later remembered counting more than 20 shots while trembling and hiding, each one echoing like a death sentence. In the living room, his friend screamed, fell, and bled. Armand, who had been in the basement, felt the impact of a bullet to his chest, but pushed through the shock and pain. He rushed toward his friend Timothy, who had collapsed, riddled with gunfire. Despite his wound, Armand tried to apply pressure, begging Timothy to hold on, calling out for help. Above him, Blair listened in terror, waiting for the storm to end. When the shooting finally stopped, silence returned. Blair pushed the bathroom door open. The scene was a nightmare. Paris and Alante lay on the living room floor, blood pooling beneath them. Timothy was slipping away despite Armand's desperate attempts. 2 frantic 911 calls were placed almost simultaneously. Blair's voice shook as he begged dispatchers for help. "Please, please. 2 of my friends are fatally wounded. Please, hurry. They've been shot. Please." From another room, Armand's voice came through as well, urgent and panicked, his chest wound making it hard to breathe. "They just came in and shot my friends. Please, please, send somebody now." The chaos of their words captured the horror of the scene. But by the time emergency responders arrived, it was already too late for some. Alante was pronounced dead at the scene. Timothy died shortly after, despite Armand's efforts. Paris, though alive when medics arrived, had been struck 4 times. She was rushed to the hospital, placed on life support so her organs could be donated, but her injuries were unsurvivable. She died not long after. The weight of the loss crushed everyone who knew them. Paris Cameron was only 20 years old. She had bravely come out as gay at 13, and just a year before had begun living openly as a transgender woman. She was vibrant, social, and unafraid to live authentically. Her friends admired her courage, her style, her energy. Timothy Miami Blanchard, also 20, was remembered for his fun-loving nature and loyalty to family. He had a close bond with his brother, who later described Timothy as someone who lit up every room. And 21-year-old Alante Tay Davis was the kind of young man who was always ready to make others laugh. His sister said he was silly, full of life, always helpful to those around him. In a matter of minutes, 3 bright futures were erased. Armand and Blair were the only survivors from the house. Both were traumatized, both physically and emotionally scarred. Blair would later say he could still hear the gunshots when he closed his eyes, and the sight of his friends' lifeless bodies haunted him. The investigation into who was behind the massacre began immediately. But despite the shooter being masked, suspicion quickly formed. The survivors recalled an encounter earlier in the night at a local BP gas station. It was around 2:40 a.m. when Paris and Alante entered the store, dressed casually, picking up drinks. Blair and Timothy soon followed. Behind them in line was a young man Paris noticed. She struck up a conversation, her natural charisma on display even in that small moment. The cameras didn't capture the words, but they showed Paris leaning toward him, smiling, and later calling after him as he left. Blair remembered Paris being overtly flirtatious, clearly intrigued. Before long, Paris extended an invitation. There was a party happening nearby and he should come. She even called out the address as Blair's car pulled away. That young man was 18-year-old Devin Robinson. He lived just 2 blocks away. And not long after, he showed up at the Devonshire Roadhouse. At first, Devin kept to himself, quiet and observant. But within minutes, he was upstairs in the master bedroom with Paris. Later, others joined in. What happened wasn't hidden. In fact, it became part of the party chatter. Jokes were made openly, teasing Devon as trade, a slang term used for men who presented as straight but secretly sought intimacy with other men. In that moment, the group laughed, carefree, unaware of the danger simmering beneath the surface. Devon may have smiled or said little in return, but something inside him was breaking. He was on the down low, hiding his sexuality from his family and community. That night, in the haze of alcohol and reckless fun, he may have felt exposed, mocked, or ashamed. And that shame festered into rage. By 4 a.m., cameras captured Devon outside again, pacing, spitting, even gagging on the sidewalk near the gas station. He bought another drink, looking unsettled, and then returned home. Less than an hour later, he reappeared at the house, but this time wearing a ski mask and carrying a gun. Police tracked his movements through surveillance footage, piecing together a chilling timeline. The gas station encounter, the brief party appearance, the return home, and the re-emergence at the crime scene. When they went to his house the next day, they found it empty. Devon and his mother had abruptly moved out, packing their belongings overnight. For days, he was nowhere to be found. His photo was released to the media, his name circulating as a wanted man. Finally, a tip led police to the other side of Detroit. Devon Robinson was arrested. During interrogation, detectives confronted him directly. They told him they knew everything, that his DNA was at the scene, that they understood what happened, that they even sympathized. They said they knew he was closeted, that the jokes at the party must have pushed him over the edge. One detective leaned in and said, "We know exactly what you did, but we want to know why. What was your emotional state? Because if you tell us, we can help you. We're men too, we understand." Devon sat quietly, denying the killings but admitting part of the truth. He confessed he had been with Paris in the bedroom. He admitted he was gay but had never told anyone, not even his family. His voice dropped as he whispered, "Nobody knows. Not even my mom. Nobody. And I don't want them to find out." But he stopped short of admitting to the murders. Still, the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses placed him at the house. Surveillance tracked his movements. And while his DNA wasn't everywhere as police had bluffed, it was found on one of the victims. The prosecution's case was clear. Devon Robinson had lashed out in a violent act of rage and shame, executing 3 young people who had done nothing but live their truth. The trial was harrowing. Survivors Blair and Armin relived the horror in their testimonies, recounting the sound of the shots, the sight of their friends dying before their eyes. The families of Paris, Timothy, and Alante sat in the courtroom, their grief raw, listening to every detail. In June 2020, Devon Robinson was found guilty of 3 counts of murder, along with other charges related to the shooting. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families, the verdict brought some measure of justice, but no closure. Their children, their siblings, their friends were gone forever. Paris would never continue her journey as a proud transgender woman. Timothy would never laugh with his brother again. Alante would never crack another joke. The tragedy highlighted not only the devastating consequences of one man's secret and shame, but also the vulnerability of young LGBTQ+ people who dared to live openly in a world that wasn't always safe. What happened on Devonshire Road was more than a crime. It was an act of hate, fueled by fear and silence, and it left a permanent scar on the community. And so, what began as a night of laughter and music in East Detroit ended in horror, a reminder of how quickly joy can turn to tragedy, and how dangerous hidden secrets can become when mixed with violence. The morning after the shootings, investigators meticulously reconstructed the events of that night, focusing on every movement and decision made by Devon Robinson. Surveillance footage from multiple locations became the cornerstone of the investigation, capturing critical moments that pieced together an unbroken timeline. At 4:53 a.m., a dark figure emerged from Devon's home on Buckingham Street, moving swiftly toward Devonshire Road. Minutes later, Another camera captured a blurred figure running from the house where the party had occurred, moments after the shots rang out. The proximity of the two locations, less than a quarter-mile apart, made it clear that someone had left one home, committed a violent attack, and returned in an alarmingly short span of time. Law enforcement immediately focused on Devon as the prime suspect, yet he maintained a calm exterior, insisting he had been at home the entire time. During interrogation, Devon attempted to deflect, claiming lapses in memory and confusion over the timeline. Detectives pressed him relentlessly, pointing out the precise alignment of surveillance footage showing someone leaving his house, committing the shooting, and returning minutes later. Devon's denials were inconsistent, and his anxiety grew as his personal life became a focus. He revealed that he was a closeted gay man, fearful of how his family might react if they discovered his sexuality. This fear, combined with alcohol and the social pressures of the party, became a key point for investigators seeking to understand the motive. The detectives probed whether this fear could have triggered a rash, violent decision, but Devon remained mostly silent, unwilling to admit any involvement in the killings. His mother, Mallory, became a figure of both support and frustration in the case. She expressed anger over media speculation portraying her son as a hate-driven murderer, emphasizing that his sexual orientation was irrelevant to the events. She argued that framing the shooting as a hate crime misrepresented the situation entirely. Meanwhile, police concentrated on the hard evidence: the camera footage, eyewitness statements, and forensic analysis of the crime scene. Every angle, every timestamp, and every captured motion was carefully scrutinized, leaving little room for ambiguity. The footage, when compared with witness accounts, painted a chillingly precise timeline, showing that the shooter had moved deliberately, with knowledge of the house layout and the victims' positions. The courtroom drama intensified as the prosecution laid out their case in vivid detail. Blair Keyes and Armin Matthews, both present during the shootings, provided testimony critical to linking Devon to the crime. Blair recounted the terror of seeing a masked figure enter the house and open fire indiscriminately. Armin described how he grabbed Timothy, guiding him to the basement, while the gunman fired into the living room. Although Armin did not see the shooter's face, Blair's testimony filled in those gaps, describing the masked figure with precise attention to height, build, and movements. The prosecution emphasized that the attack was deliberate, executed with knowledge of the victims' locations, leaving no doubt that the shooter acted with lethal intent. The survivors' accounts highlighted both the chaos and the split-second choices required to survive. Blair hid in the bathroom, listening to over 20 gunshots reverberate through the house. When he emerged, he found his friends Paris Cameron and Alante Davis gravely wounded. Armand's instinct to provide immediate first aid was heroic, but insufficient to save Timothy and Paris. Their stories conveyed the terror, confusion, and urgency of the moment, revealing the harrowing experience of living through an unpredictable, violent attack. The jury heard every detail of these accounts, understanding how quickly the situation escalated from a house party to a deadly scene of carnage. The prosecution also highlighted Devon's prior interactions with the victims, focusing on the party's social dynamics. Paris had invited Devon to the house after their encounter at a nearby gas station, and he had briefly engaged in intimate activity in the master bedroom with her and others. While the defense sought to portray these events as ordinary party interactions, the prosecution argued that they provided crucial context for his emotional state and possible motive. Blair expressed concern about bringing a stranger into the house, a concern that ultimately underscored the danger of Devon's presence. The prosecution framed these social dynamics as the backdrop against which a calculated act of violence occurred, blending social anxiety, fear, and impulsivity. Forensic evidence further corroborated the prosecution's case. Though the firearm was never recovered, Bullet trajectories, entry points, and wound locations aligned with the survivors' accounts. Bloodstains and other traces indicated that the shooter had moved deliberately through the house, targeting individuals with lethal precision. Investigators noted that no alternative suspect could account for the meticulous alignment of movements captured on camera. The circumstantial evidence, when paired with eyewitness testimony, created a compelling narrative of premeditated action, leaving little room for doubt about Devon's involvement. Identification of Devon as the shooter became a key turning point in the trial. Blair initially struggled to make a positive identification under the stress of the shooting, but upon review and reflection, he confirmed that the masked figure who had entered the house and opened fire was indeed Devon Robinson. Our man corroborated aspects of this, describing how he moved with Timothy to safety while observing shadows and movements, even if he did not directly see the shooter's face. The jury was presented with a comprehensive reconstruction of the crime, linking the surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and physical evidence to a single individual whose actions led to the deaths of 3 young people. The trial delved into the psychology of Devon, exploring the pressures and fears that may have influenced his behavior. While the defense argued that he was a young man overwhelmed by fear, intoxication, and social embarrassment, the prosecution highlighted the calculated nature of his actions. Surveillance footage showed him leaving his home, traveling to the party, carrying out the attack, and returning home, all within a tight time frame. There was no credible alternative explanation for his presence at the scene or the movements captured on camera. The prosecution argued that these actions were deliberate, executed with an understanding of consequences and lethal intent. As the proceedings concluded, the jury weighed the substantial body of evidence, including survivor testimony, forensic findings, and surveillance records. The social context of the party, Devon's interactions with Paris, and his movements before and after the shooting created a coherent narrative of responsibility. The jury deliberated extensively, considering both the evidence and the arguments surrounding motive and intent. Ultimately, the jury found Devon guilty on all counts: 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 2 counts of assault with intent to murder, and multiple firearm-related felonies. The sentences reflected the severity of the crime, with 3 consecutive life terms without parole, accompanied by additional consecutive terms for other charges, signaling the court's acknowledgement of the gravity of his actions. The aftermath of the verdict focused on the lives lost and the community's response. Families and friends of Paris Cameron, Alante Davis, and Timothy Blanchard continued to honor their memories, remembering their personalities, joy, and the unfulfilled potential of their lives. Survivors spoke publicly about the trauma they endured and the bravery required to survive the attack. Devon's appeals, largely focused on identification evidence, were unsuccessful, cementing his responsibility and the court's affirmation of justice. His incarceration remains for decades, reflecting both the legal consequences and the societal imperative to address such acts of calculated violence. In closing, the East Detroit house party shooting was a devastating example of the lethal intersection of fear, secrecy, and opportunity. The events unfolded with terrifying speed, leaving a trail of evidence, survivor testimony, and community grief. The judicial process brought a measure of justice, but the emotional scars remain. Families continue to honor the memories of Paris, Alante, and Timothy, reflecting on the tragedy and the lessons it imparts. This case stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of life